Governor Thompson.
Mayor Giuliani, I'd like to associate myself, and I think probably every member of the panel does, with Commissioner Benveniste's opening remarks, considering your extraordinary leadership not only for the city of New York during crisis, but for the nation as well, in setting an example for all of us. And I'd like to take up on your opening statement and simply express my opinion that we here on this commission are not engaged in a search for blame. We're not engaged in a search for villains. We're engaged in two things. One, what actually happened as best we can determine it. And two, what lessons can we learn from what happened and the response to it that hopefully will lessen the chance that it will happen again or in such great numbers. All of us realize that it will happen again in some fashion somewhere, probably not in the same way. As we observed yesterday, the enemy is versatile, smart, entrepreneurial, and they don't fight the same war twice, as we sometimes do. We can't do that and carry the country with us in support of reform if we're seen as people who judge solely in hindsight, second-guessing decisions of people who stood in the thick of battle with debris and bodies falling from the 100th floor and had to make split-second decisions on rescuing and helping as many people as possible. In my view, it would dishonor the memory of those who died on September 11th if we don't learn those lessons and teach them to the country and hope for their support. I would rather honor the memory of those who died by moving forward and helping save other Americans. Now, could you give us a description of the particular kinds of information you either did or did not receive from the FBI during the summer of 1991 with particular reference, and the Commission has devoted many hours to this, information that was received or not received about Osama bin Laden or Al-Qaeda during this period of extraordinary high chatter that the FBI and the CIA have previously testified about during that summer that preceded September 11th, 2001.
The information that I received in the summer or in the period leading up to September 11, 2001 would be not terribly different than the information that I received over the maybe 2 or 3 years prior to that, going back to 97, 98 with the terrorist bombing case and the terrorists that were brought to New York to be prosecuted in the Southern District of New York. From that point on, we would receive fairly regular briefings that the city was on alert, that there were dangers, that there were risks. Most of my briefings would come from the police, and most of them would occur during the regular meeting I had each week with the police commissioner, which included a written report and an oral presentation either from the commissioner or from the deputy commissioner or one of the people that was an expert on this. And then every once in a while, but I can't remember this increasing particularly in 2001, but every once in a while it would include a briefing by John O'Neill from the FBI, who would come over after having maybe told the police department about it. He wanted to reiterate something of importance that he would tell me. And sometimes it would come from Louis Freeh, who would call me from Washington to say they wanted to brief me on something. But that was not particularly different in 2001 than it was in 98, 99, 2000. And beginning back then, we would continuously get alerts and and advice about things that we should do, like to close down the area around the courthouse, because there was a fear that there would be a bombing at the courthouse in retaliation for holding the terrorists in the Metropolitan Correction Center. So we did that. We closed the streets around the courthouse and put up barricades. And then specific warnings about the stock exchange and about City Hall. And we put up barriers around all of those places. And then sometimes there'd be an arrest to be made. And during the arrest, things were seized from the terrorists. And the things seized from the terrorists would include plans that sometimes would be the plans of New York City subways, New York City tunnels. Very often it'd be the stock exchange, public buildings, City Hall, or whatever. So those were thought of as the primary. Those were thought of as the primary target, and it seemed to me that information, that protocol that the FBI and the police developed, came largely from what they were seizing from terrorists or suspected terrorists. And I assume, because I wasn't privy to this part of it, and I assume from what they were hearing on their interceptions. But there was no. I mean, we were on high alert from about 97, 98 on. Probably the most briefings I received and the most information came in the build-up to the Millennium Celebration in 2000, where I received 4 or 5 separate briefings about possible terrorist plans to attack that celebration. And we went through drills and exercises and deployed thousands of police officers and did background checks because there was a question about whether to cancel it or not. I think the one in Seattle was canceled. And we decided to go forward with it, but with some real risk attached to it. But there was nothing particular in that summer of 2001 that was any different than, before, in the 4 or 5 years before.
You've faced many decisions as a chief executive, and you understand how chief executives function. We've heard in these hearings and even more in our private interviews about the difficulty of chief executives, whether President Clinton or President Bush or President Reagan or President Bush again, getting briefings on every conceivable subject that falls within a president's jurisdiction and having to sort of prioritize the issues of the day and make decisions on those. We've heard about the August 6th PDB that President Bush received, and we've heard about the PDBs that President Clinton was privy to and decisions that were made on the basis of intelligence. Can you give us just a perspective as a former chief executive on the difficulties or challenges that chief executives face in dealing with everything at once every day?
Well, I think that now when you go back over a report and you know the end of the story, which is a horrible one, but you know the end of the story, the reports that are relevant become much more obvious than before you know the end of it. And part of the reason for that is because you're given so much information at all different levels. I mean, the FBI and the CIA and the other intelligence agencies collect enormous amounts of information. Then they distill that information and they pass on a smaller amount, but even still an enormous amount of information. As the mayor of New York City, I was probably warned about threats to New York City. I can't give you like an accurate or scientific number. I'll give you one for rhetorical impact. Once a day or 5 times a week, or it was not unusual for me to receive a phone call from Police Commissioner Bratton or Police Commissioner Safer or Police Commissioner Carrick and say, I have to talk to you on a secure phone, or I need to meet with you, and to give me a warning about a threat, something that was going to happen to the city. So I imagine with a president, you would multiply that out many, many times. So now that we hear the word threat and it's attached to something that appears to be connected to September 11, it jumps out at us. At the time, it has to have melded together with hundreds of other things that were of equal or more importance. So when I look at these reports, they don't seem to me to be the kinds of things that would jump out at you to be so terribly unusual.
Let's turn our attention to the FBI for a moment. I'm sure you're acquainted somewhat, at least, with the efforts that Director Mueller has made to reform the FBI and to change the focus of its mission from strictly law enforcement to law enforcement and intelligence, and to change the culture of the FBI to reward intelligence successes in the same way that they reward or have rewarded traditionally law enforcement successes in dealing with their agents. Give us your assessment of how well you think he's done so far, but also give us your assessment of what structural changes we may need to recommend concerning the FBI or the CIA, for that matter, because neither Director Tenet nor Director Mueller will, despite good intentions, always be there, and we need to tell the Congress and the American people how the collection and dissemination of intelligence for the defense of this nation should be handled in the future.
Well, I think it would be very, very valuable to recommend the creation of joint terrorism task forces in all major cities in the country, so that the FBI and the police are working together as partners. When Rick Benvenisti asked me that before, and I referred to the Joint Terrorism Task Force that was established in the late 1970s, the real benefit of it is that the police officer, police detective, and the FBI agent are partners. They sit in the same office. They go out and investigate the same case. So it doesn't mean you always get all the information that you want, and it doesn't mean that the director doesn't have to break down even barriers there, but at least you're dealing at a level of trust and cooperation that is beyond, a lot of it throughout the United States. That would be an excellent mechanism to kind of assure that the information is flowing. That also presents to the FBI in a compelling way the need for the two-way street of cooperation. There was a case, I don't know if Commissioner Carrick described this yesterday, but there was a case about a year and a half before September 11, 2001, in which the Joint Terrorism Task Force foiled an attack on the New York City subways by terrorists who had plans for the subways, the tunnels, the bridges. That case happened because a citizen noticed something suspicious and went into a police precinct and described it to a cop, who decided, in evaluating what the citizen said, that it was suspicious, and then brought in the Joint Terrorism Task Force. But it happened because of good old-fashioned police work. I don't know, it may have happened anyway, but I'm not sure it would have happened if you didn't have that joint terrorism connection where the police work very closely with the FBI. That would help a lot. I think that the director has made great strides in opening the FBI up, and I think he's moving them in exactly the right direction. And the only advice from my limited perspective that I can offer with regard to the CIA and intelligence gathering is, and this is a belief more than it is something I can prove, I think if we had more human intelligence, and we didn't rely just on interceptions, but we had human intelligence to inform the vast mounds of information that we get, we'd better be able to interpret it and to figure out priorities. When you asked me before about the amount of information that comes in to intelligence analysts, you can put it on, it's this big, and it all says threat, and it all says bad people who want to do terrible things. To figure out which one you should concentrate on, you need an interpreter, and the interpreter is human intelligence, somebody inside these organizations. That's the way we investigated organized crime, and that's the way we investigated drug operations. You infiltrate them, and then the interceptions make sense to you. I think we fell in love with our technology. I think we felt we had so much technology that made us secure, and we moved away. And I'm not talking about this president or the last one, but for some time we moved away from the tough, more difficult, and dirty work of human infiltrating organizations. And if you had infiltrated organizations, then maybe the communique, you wouldn't just rely on a briefing. Somebody pointed out to you and say, that's the important one.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.